Hi, I'm Lisette Jacobson, host of the Black, Brown, and Bilingue podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Jason Edwards. He is an award-winning, world-renowned photographer for National Geographic. He has had amazing adventures throughout our world, and he shares his journeys in his book, Icebergs to Iguanas, Photographic Journeys Around the World. What an amazing book. What incredible stories. You're going to love this talk. Thanks for listening. Oh, by the way, before you go, it'd be so cool if you helped out the podcast. And here are 3 ways you could do that. 1, tell a friend and share the links. 2, go to my website and leave a review and subscribe. And 3, how about click on the link on my website homepage where it says buy me a coffee. And by doing this, you can donate $1 or $2 to help me address the costs, associated with producing the podcast. That would be so cool. You are awesome. Enjoy the show.
When I started traveling, I thought I would just record some notes, and the journals have always fluctuated. I'd find them in airports, or I'd find handmade ones somewhere, or whatever the case might be. And I found myself using it as a detox. And I would strongly recommend to anyone the joy and wonder, regardless of what you do for a living. You could be in the corporate space, you could be a creative, you could be a police officer, it doesn't really matter what it is. The ability to put down a few words, doesn't have to be every day, gives you that voice from your own head.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
National Geographic's Jason Edwards has been at the forefront of natural history photography for more than 3 decades. His image portfolio ranks among the largest of any photographer in the Society's long history. Based in Melbourne, Australia, a passion for wildlife and the environment has been with him over his extensive career that began as a zookeeper at the Zoological Board of Victoria. Jason has since been recognized globally for his contributions to science, the environment, and the arts. Jason's accolades within the photographic industry stretch over 25 years and include, among others, 2 times winner of the Eureka Prize for science photography, 6 times or more times winner for communications art photography annual, 2 times winner of the ProMax Golden Muse, POYi Pictures of the Year International, and Travel Photographer of the Year. He was awarded the Australian Geographic Society Pursuit of Excellence Award and also honored as one of the world's 100 photography heroes by Professional Photographer magazine, London. Through his commissioned assignments and as the face of National Geographic Channel's Pure Photography, Jason has taken his storytelling to televisions and streaming networks in dozens of countries and to every continent. His imagery has appeared in hundreds of publications, including National Geographic Magazine, BBC Wildlife, Australian Geographic, Sports Illustrated, Condé Nast Traveler, and The New Yorker. Jason is the author and photographer of Icebergs to Iguanas, a large format series of books illustrating his National Geographic imagery. He also authored and photographed science education books for the children's education market, and his imagery has appeared on everything from environmental campaigns to Hollywood blockbusters. As a leader and mentor, Jason has worked with photographers of all levels, instructing them in the art of storytelling and how to find and translate images. He has spent years providing rich and entertaining experiences, working in partnership with organizations and individuals, guiding participants both on private expeditions and as one of National Geographic's most sought-out experts. The Conservation Photographers ILCP is an organization that utilizes the power of photography to educate and inspire people globally about conservation issues. Jason is an associate fellow of the ILCP and uses his lens to narrate and highlight issues affecting wildlife, the environment, and indigenous communities. Jason holds an honors degree in the Bachelor of Applied Science in Scientific Photography and tertiary qualifications in the animal sciences. Jason is an ambassador for both Tourism Australia and Substantially Victoria. He is a friend of the Australia Museum and a coveted keynote speaker. Drawing upon his skills as an environmentalist, animal scientist, documentarian, and National Geographic stalwart, Jason is an entertaining and insightful raconteur, champion natural history and the art of photography. In addition, he is the host of Snap Happy, the photography show, which airs nationally across Australia. Jason's fine art prints are archived in private collections around the world and have been exhibited internationally, including the USA, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and Europe, where National Geographic presented his compelling imagery of Elang at the prestigious Visa pour l'Image Photojournalism Festival. Jason, thanks so much for being on the show, and say hi to everyone.
G'day, mate, and thank you for having me along. Thanks for having me in the country, everyone.
Well, it's so awesome to talk with you, and your book is amazing. The imagery is just incredible, and I can't thank you enough for what you've done for the world and bringing these images to it. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I got to say this. You started out as a zookeeper in the Melbourne Zoo, specializing in big cats and great apes, among other primates. How and why did you transition to becoming a photographer?
Yeah, look, mate, it's a great question, but the story actually begins a little bit earlier. So I started shooting when I was 8, using my mum's Kodak canister camera, you know, the ones that had the little canister film in. And the first pictures I took were at the airport, believe it or not, at Tullamarine in Melbourne. And back in those days, they let kids in onto the tarmac. Like literally the shots, I'm this 8-year-old on the tarmac photographing a Pan Am jet, literally a Pan Am jet. Nice. And then they took us into the jet, and I took this picture. I've still got all these photos looking out over that enormous grey wing. Who would have ever thought that, you know, decades later I'd have done tens of thousands, or God, hundreds of thousands of kilometers looking at those wings. So I did that. And then when I was about 14, I had this epiphany that I wanted to make imagery for the rest of my life. I always painted and drew. So I was really heavily into drawing and then eventually oils. But I was more focused on what didn't belong in my imagery and compositionally rather than what should belong. I was very, very attentive to the get rid of that kind of factor. And people thought for a long time I was going to be the next Dali. I did lots of surrealism and things like that. Maybe I'm not saying I had that skill, of course, but just that genre. And then, 14, 15, I went, I want to make images. My grandmother went to Hong Kong. 3 months later, I gave her $250, which was my my money from delivering paper rounds. And she came back with a Cassina CT7, which at that point I think was the world's first electronic camera, not digital, but electronic, a 50mm lens and a flash for my birthday. Nice. And I started shooting as everyone does, their friends. I went to quite a good school, and so shooting sport and all of that kind of thing. And I had pictures published off my 3rd roll of film. And I was hooked then on editorial. I love seeing my work in print. And when I finished high school, I did what so many people do with zoos. I sent off a letter, and I studied art and art history all the way through, but I also studied biology, chemistry, maths, the sciences. And I sent a letter saying, is there any jobs? And they came back saying, no, there's not. But about 3 months later, I get this letter from the zoo saying, come in for an interview on Tuesday. And my application, I went to a great school, must have just been sitting on top of the pile. And I've got to be honest with you, buddy, I turned up, and then the curator, who was German, all the curators at that time were German at Melbourne Zoo, and he looked at me and he said, are you the applicant that's on time or the applicant that's late? And I looked up at the clock on his wall and waited 3 seconds, and I said, now I'm one that's on time. And, Germans love being on time. Good. And, the irony was that was the only time I was ever on time in my career at Melbourne Zoo. So I started 2 days later, and literally I started at the zoo 2 days later. And I was there for 12 years. But during that 12 years, of course, I was surrounded by wildlife. And that was my focus, obviously. And I just started shooting. I was shooting on Kodak Gold 100 film or Kodak 400. But I was also exposed to the photographers from the media that were coming in to shoot the new baby elephant or whatever. And so I was always asking them questions, and it was an interesting time for me because I didn't study photography. Everything was by trial and error. So I'd get the film, I'd send it off, I'd look at the photos, or I would, and it's still the best way to do it now, actually, although it's just easier with digital. I would take shots of bookcases at different focal lengths, at 50mm, at 70mm, whatever, and I would record my f-stops so I could see how much was in focus and how much wasn't in focus, and then look at the photos. So I taught myself everything from scratch. And but during that time, to your point, the zoo would always get requests from magazines and book publishers and things like that, especially children's education publishers, do you have a picture of an elephant or a wolf or whatever the case might be? And they'd say, look, we've got this young guy, Jace. Here's his phone number. Give him a call. He'll go and shoot it for you if he doesn't have it. And so people started calling me for pictures, which I would then send off, and they would put them in print. So I was a little bit more business savvy then than I am now. And I used 6 months of my salary one year to pay a copyright lawyer. And the copyright lawyer, I gave him some background, I did some research, and we designed a very brutal contract that said, amongst other things, that if my work, but you don't publish my name, I bill you an extra 100%. And I have always been about IP. You know, photographers don't protect their IP enough. So my name started to get out there. So I'm working at the zoo. I formed a stock agency called Bioimages back in the day. So it gave me a platform by which the work went out. So the image credits would say Jason Edwards Bioimages. What I didn't realize was going to happen, Jason Edwards would disappear and Bioimages would be printed everywhere. So no one realized it was just me creating all the work. And so I started a small business, and at that time I was doing 3 degrees. I ended up doing 3 degrees, running the photography business and being a zookeeper full time. And that was like for 10 or 12 years. And you can imagine that I wasn't getting a lot of sleep, and I maybe wasn't necessarily the best partner in the house to the people I was dating at the time.
I can imagine. What a cool way to start. And I have to go back to something that you said, because boy, do I remember the days of being able to walk on the tarmac to get to the plane. And to know that you're out there taking pictures as an 8-year-old, or that's pretty amazing there too.
Yeah. Well, it's what's interesting, Steve, is that when you look back at these journeys that we've all had, and I think there's a line in the book, and I said it more eloquently than this, I think, but I just hoped as I traveled through my journey that those old dot to dot drawings, you'd find 1, 2, or whatever, and then eventually it makes an image, that dot to dot drawing of my life would be something that I find interesting whenever the end comes. But the irony with Melbourne Zoo is that when I started high school, so I was 12, going on 13, we did a school excursion and we were playing hide and seek. And I was doing the hiding too well, and then I couldn't find anyone. And it turned out my class had left me behind at the zoo. Wow. And it was like 3 weeks into my high school career. And so, of course, that was miles from where my parents live, where we live. So you can imagine that that wreaked a bit of havoc with the school and my mum, who was a powerhouse at the time. But, ironically, I'm 12 getting left at the zoo, and then at 18, I walk through the doors as a zookeeper. So maybe I was always destined to have that in my life for better or worse.
That's amazing. And that has to be that your path was set.
It was set, yes. It was set by playing hide and seek.
Yes, exactly. I love that. All right, so Jason, we're talking about your amazing book today, and it's called Icebergs to Iguanas, Photographic Journeys Around the World. What incredible images and details you share about your adventures. And in the introduction, you note, it's the world as I've experienced it, full of chance encounters and complex dichotomies, beauty and brutality, famine and feast, and through it all, a desire to celebrate life's many wonders. Could you talk about the field journals that you kept over 30 years to share those experiences?
Yes. I think for me, I never journaled as a child, of course, but, well, actually, apart from when I had heartbreak, by trying to date Donna McNamara in my swimming club, and she didn't see anything in me. So I remember writing in one of my lap journals, I swam state level, all this heartfelt pouring out of teenage angst, why Donna didn't love me. But apart from that, which, you probably didn't need to know, when I started traveling, I thought I would just record some notes, and the journals have always fluctuated. I'd find them in airports, or I'd find handmade ones somewhere, or whatever the case might be. And I found myself using it as a detox. And I would strongly recommend to anyone the joy and wonder, regardless of what you do for a living. You could be in the corporate space, you could be a creative, you could be a police officer, it doesn't really matter what it is. The ability to put down a few words, doesn't have to be every day, gives you that voice from your own head and releases that to the ether, releases it to the universe. So I always ignorantly thought that I would remember every species and every encounter, and I do. I'm reasonably eidetic for that. But so I didn't write down, every frog species or whatever. That's not what my journals were about. My journals were about me maybe going, and I'm not saying that there's moments of reasonably good text in there, of course, but I shouldn't say, of course, that's a bit egotistical, isn't it? No, but I mean, I wrote the book. I can pen a word, I guess, if I've had a glass of wine. But it was one of those things that when I'm working alone, or even when I'm working with a team, at the end of the day, it gives me that opportunity to reflect for a few minutes on what I've just experienced. Because, I mean, to be honest, I had a great, very hectic 12-year career as a zookeeper, which was one of the most sought after careers on earth. And then I started a photography business, and I used the money from the zoo to fund my travels and buy equipment and everything like that. So I know that I've worked hard for it, but the opportunity to travel the world is a privilege, and we'll probably speak more about that, I guess. But then to put some words down in a journal means that there's that flow back. And when I was going through the journals, it was quite cathartic, but also too, and you know this, Steve. I mean, you spend enough time on the planet and you read back some of those comments and you go, wow, I sound a bit terrible there. It's like, but it's like a text or an email. Like I might have the pictures that relate to it, but it can be out of context. And I'll give you a good example. There's when I was doing the shipbreaking story for Icebergs, that's hard. It's hard. People are dying. The men are catching fire, all of that. I'm in an industrial town. And I'm also working in India again and again and again. They don't want me there. The people don't want to be photographed, not so much in the shipyards, but you're getting ripped off all the time because even the children are sharks in India and they're good at marketing and ripping you off. And so you're exhausted and you're depressed. And so you might write something in a journal that if you read it 20 years later says, well, that sounds a bit terrible, but you have to look at it in journals. You have to look at them in the context of which they were written. And that's one of the things I think we've lost a little bit of in society now, whether it be the arts or movies or culture or music, and not that things shouldn't change. Society should change and it should evolve. But sometimes people are a bit harsh on the past, not realizing that things were different and they're changing and they should change. But I know that when I looked at my journals, the journals were a reflection of my growth as an individual, but also how I saw the world.
That's awesome. That's and you're so right about the differences in our ages. If you have something, when you look back on something that you wrote at that time, may not be the same way you see it now, and if you had experienced it again. But at the same time, it's being able to experience your thoughts and look back on what they were. It's a cool aspect of your book is that you have these entries from these journals of different times.
Yeah, and it also gave me the opportunity as well to when I was writing the body of the text for each of the stories, because it enabled me to look at the overall, the body of work from whatever shoot it was or multiple shoots towards the story, and then reflect on the words that I'd penned. And one thing I do have to say, though, is that Melbourne, it's a long and tragic story, but we had the longest lockdown on earth. We were longer than London and Argentina and Buenos Aires and everything. And since I've been back on the road and I've been pushing hard, very hard, back to backs for a couple of years, and I know that my ability to journal has been broken in some way. Not the desire to do it, but that me rebuilding my life after being inside for 2.5 years. For me, it was 2.5 years, has meant that when I attempt to journal, sometimes I really struggle to not find the passion to do it, but to actually connect, with my activities that day, because it's taken so much work for me to create the content that I want to create, that has to be the primary focus. But that's a process. I'm aware of it and it's coming back, and I love doing it. So it's not something I don't want to do. But the one thing, Steve, that I did do is before my son Will was born, about 6 months before he was born, I started writing a journal to him. And I write it as if we're in conversation. And sometimes it could be a 3 or 4 month gap between an entry, or sometimes it's more regular, or whatever the case might be. Quite often they're entries before I go off on a dangerous shoot and I go, hey, buddy, I'm getting on the plane in an hour, and they're just updates on our everyday life. And he doesn't even know that they're there. So it's not like there's 27 volumes or something. There's probably several journals, but at some point he'll read it but he knows I'm the emotional SWAT in the family. So, I'm sure he'll read it one day and go, yeah, this is Dad that I know. But yeah, I've been doing that on the side on occasion over the years as well.
That's cool. That is very cool. I'm going to use this as an opportunity to give an example of stuff that you've written. Like, for example, one of the sections in the book that I really love is on Antarctica. And in one of the sections, you say this: Antarctica is like nowhere else on Earth, a frozen and exquisitely beautiful world devoid of trees and grass and all things green. Humans did not evolve to inhabit such brutal conditions, and it's only recently in our collective civilization that we've started to understand the continent. That's cool.
Thanks, Mike. Cheers.
And it says you wrote that in March of 2010.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, and it's almost a cliche, isn't it, to say that Antarctica is like nowhere else, but it is not like anywhere else. And it's one of those places that that is difficult to get to and costly to get to, and I'm privileged that I've worked there many times, but it's also a place as a creative where you can give, especially for me, the whirlwind of my mind, a moment's pause, because the vastness of it and the often monotone nature of the landscape and the ocean means that you sort of have to look into yourself to try and create outwardly, I think, when you're in Antarctica.
That's so amazing. One of the things I love in that section is where you have these pictures of penguins that the birds they're just doing their thing. And and one of my favorites is a picture from behind of one that's kind of moving forward, and I love that image because it's just life going on. I think it's cool.
Penguin, yeah. And I mean, that penguin, I tell you, that frame that you're talking about, tried to get up that slope in a howling wind, about 7 times, and I just watched that one penguin go again and again and again. And in the creative part of my brain was like, I hope he actually gets up, because I've spent a lot of time watching this penguin trying to get to the edge, to the edge. But they build these rookeries away from the water's edge, of course, because they don't want leopard seal and other predators, other seals coming out, and it's hard enough with the skuas and the other bird life. So they have to climb these pretty hefty slopes to get back to the rookery sometimes.
That's just amazing to be part of that as you're experiencing it, especially to be thinking what you're just thinking. Boy, I really hope he gets there, because
there's no guarantees. It's like, they slide down, and then they could slide down 6 times and then go, screw it, I'm done. I'm just going to hang down here for a while. And you've spent a good hour and a half watching the one penguin and not shot anything else. So we're all limited for time, even me, Steve. So it's some of those gambles do not pay off.
I can imagine, but that's an amazing picture right there, that whole series. And then to know that, it's just wild. And in another section of the book that's titled Life and Death in a River Town, which you say the location is in the Amazon basin in South America, you specifically have a comment that you make that says this: another heartbreaking day documenting confiscated wildlife, an ocelot found in a home after its mother was slaughtered. If you purchase an animal to save it, you condemn more wildlife to death by creating demand. You buy and the poachers replace, just like every other retail transaction. And you wrote that in 2009.
Yeah. Amazon's this juxtaposition. It's, you go hiking at night and every leaf you turn over is some crazy insect, and you just wonder how evolution ever created it. And the beauty of it, and the complexity of indigenous cultures there, and then you have that heartbreaking juxtaposition of being in towns where they don't have fun. And this is the big thing: poaching is such a complex issue. The people it's very easy to sit in my country and your country and Europe and everything and say, oh, these people are bad people who are poaching or whatever. But I'd encourage people to think differently about it, in the sense that people who live in these communities only have the protein resources they can get from rivers and forests. There's no farmland, it floods, so they can't have cows and sheep and goats and all of those kinds of things. They can bring things in, but most people aren't wealthy enough to be saying, I'm going to ship in a steak from I forget the name of the steak place here in Chicago, but I just walked past one near the hotel and went, wow, that looks nice. But they just can't do that. And so they access this resource. And I remember there's a picture in there of yellow-footed tortoise, which is a critically endangered tortoise species. Now, if you believe in reincarnation and you come back as a yellow-footed tortoise with a black animal with a yellow cross on your back and you move slowly through a green rainforest, which makes you like a target for everyone, and you taste good, you know you've done something wrong in your previous life. And so you see these critically endangered tortoises cut in half, and it's heartbreaking because they sell for $4. But also, too, you have to step out of that conversation with yourself and say, well, if I had a family and children and things like that, and I can create a broth from that will feed that family for multiple days, that is how they see it. They don't necessarily know or want to know that it's endangered. It's just food. But there is a difference. And the ocelot is a great example that you bring up, in that the pet trade is insidious. It's insidious. And so if I understand if someone's doing bushmeat for supporting communities or whatever, I find it difficult, of course, but the pet trade is a whole nother thing. So where you've got people killing jaguar and ocelot and other animals in Africa, or in this case, South America, and they're doing it to supply pets or jewelry or things like that. Now, the indigenous people, the local people in these towns, some of them quite substantial, they're not walking around with a jaguar pelt wristband on. They have no interest in that. They just don't have any interest in it. And very rarely, all of those things are actually going back from people who pass through from our countries or from Asia or Europe or Australia or America, the Americas, So the pet trade, if you buy something, whether you buy an animal or you rescue, in italics, an animal, because I meet people, they say, oh, we bought this ocelot cub or this margay cub or something like that, and we've given it to this place and things like that. And it's like, no one's doing rehabilitation of carnivores in the wild. It's just not happening, Steve. It's like they can tell you and you can get donations. People give millions to these people. But the mother of that animal is what teaches it to hunt. There's no provenance for that carnivore. You don't know where in the jungle it came from. You don't know whether you're cross-contaminating populations. And how do you teach an animal, that whether it's a cub or whatever, to go and hunt this insect versus this bird versus this? It's just not happening. So please, to anyone who's listening, your heart will be in the right place, but don't buy animals that you are creating demand, and don't buy souvenirs that have come from claws of animals or feathers and all of these sorts of things, because you are literally buying the next iPhone. That's the thing, and I'm not bagging iPhones at all. I have one. I love them. But the next iPhone comes out and everyone queues up at the Apple store. If you turn around and buy something to that person who supplied that, and myself and my friend who worked there together, we went through college together, we smuggle our way into these smuggling networks. And we have people who are sitting there. We don't buy the animals, of course. We're just trying to track the movements of things, but and monitor it. But we can turn up to a place and they say, do you want ocelot cubs or jaguar cubs tomorrow?
Wow.
It's like, what the hell? That shouldn't be the case. So it's there. I'm obviously, hopefully, I'm passionate about it. That might come across in what I'm saying, but all of that pet trade, or the vast majority of that pet trade, is going into Central America, North America, Europe and Asia. Australian biosecurity laws are world famously tight. So it's not the Aussies necessarily that are bringing this stuff in, but people who want unusual reptiles in aquaria, or birds and things like that, or they're buying these things and the pet store's saying, no, we don't take these things out of the wild. How would you know? Sometime at some point that these animals had to have been taken out of the wild for people to be breeding them. And some of these animals don't breed well in captivity. So you have to ask the question, am I doing the right thing, or am I part of the supply chain out of South America?
That's wild to think about that, especially and so important. I recently was in Florida, and there was a big article in the paper about how they're trying alternatives to trying to figure out how to rid themselves of these boas that have been released into the wild by people who bought them as pets, and they're just all over the Everglades. And
yeah, that's right. And of course, they eat all the native species that belong there.
Right.
And so you end up getting your species diversity list shrinks, and some species become what we regard as regionally extinct. So they might be no longer in the Everglades, but they're somewhere else. But right. You don't want them to become extinct anywhere. And we had the same thing. God love the British, but they introduced cane toads into Australia for the cane beetle, for the sugar cane beetle. which was ironic in hindsight because the sugarcane beetles at the leaf, which is 10 or 12 feet in the air, and cane toads are toads. They're on the ground. They never get into that beetle. But of course they breed and they've got poison and they're noxious. And so now they're all over the top part of Australia eating marsupials and other frogs and birds and all of these sorts of things. And they're millions, hundreds of millions. And that's our equivalent of the boa, just on a much larger scale.
Wow. It's just incredible how these things happen. And especially, just like you said, if you purchase, you're just encouraging that process to continue happening. And
correct. Yeah.
It's so important to for people to recognize that. I want to make sure that I mention another section of your book, because this is my favorite section, and you have all kinds of really cool stuff of people interacting and so forth. But I am fascinated by wild horses, and in this one section, it's called "Land of the Wild Horse." Passion, education, and culture unite in the desert sand. And the location is the Northern Territory of Australia, and you wrote this in 2015. And I just want to read from the first paragraph, which says, "I crouched in the middle of a shrub in the darkness, shivering through those bitter hours before dawn. Wild horses in Australia are known as brumbies, and these were incredibly wary. Hours before, I hiked through the moonless desert, avoiding their well-trodden path, considering where the sun would rise, what elements would be in my frame, and which direction the wind would cross the sands. I had no time to install a hide and allow the brumbies to get used to it. Short assignments and shy, mobile wildlife are not ideal bedfellows." Talk with us about brumbies.
So brumbies are a controversial issue in Australia. So these wild horses, so they're not native to Australia, and the problem we have with brumbies, and you and I were talking about it before, and camels, is they're hard-hooved animals. They're ungulates in the genetic biological tree. They're ungulates. And our fragile deserts and our high country where we get snow and things like that, their hooves crush these fragile habitats, where plants both in the high country and in the desert are very slow growing because the climate is so harsh. And Australia, of course, has thousands of kilometres of desert. And so these brumbies, when released, of course, bred up, and now Australia has the largest population of wild horses in the world, and they inhabit the deserts and the high country. And when I suggested to one of my editors about doing this story on horses, they were very, very, originally this was one of the other Geographics, even though the work's with National Geographic now, but they were very, very reluctant because they said, we go near horses and we get death threats. People are passionate about horses. And I said, oh, well, I think the story should be looked at. And 3 years later, they called up and said, let's get this happening. But what we did differently, myself and the journalists on this story, is that we gave everyone a chance to have a say. The horse people, the anti-horse people, who are not anti-horse at all. They're actually just trying to protect the environment. And we didn't get a single letter when that story came out of complaint. We weren't nailed for it or anything like that. But it's interesting because for many Australians, they think that they're natives or they have some cultural significance because of, like they do in the US, cowboys, Mustangs, all of these sorts of things. People have that same passion for wild horses in Australia. The difference is that, I love the US, it's like my second home, but there's 17 times more people in the US than there are in Australia, and we're the same size. You have lots of wild places, of course, but, Mustangs never took over the country. They never went, they never went destroying ecosystems and driving species to the brink. That's not what Mustangs did. In Australia, we don't have the arable land that the United States has. We just don't. 85% of the population lives in a sliver on the eastern seaboard. We're the driest inhabited continent on Earth. Antarctica is the driest continent, but we're the driest inhabited continent. And so these horses, which I love, and my father, we always owned when I was younger, and my father rode the rodeo and all of that kind of thing, I thought the story was important because we have to address this issue. As a nation, we have to address this issue. And then, of course, the Aboriginal connection, the First Nations people, I came across this marvelous story of an outback, and this is in the middle of nowhere, this outback school where to get Indigenous students to turn up, if you turned up more than 85%, you were taken out to an outstation where you were instructed on horse management and care by an amazing horseman from the desert, and teaching them to ride and to care and to saddle and to do all of these sorts of things and to break in wild brumbies. And because the stations in Australia, with all love and respect to anyone listening in Texas, ours are pretty big, much bigger than Texas. And so there's opportunities for First Nation boys and girls, to work on these stations, and they're the best horsemen in the country. They're amazing. So, these kids were turning up to school, tick, going out into the bush, tick, learning about horse culture and rescuing horses that, of course, during the drought, the hot times, don't necessarily survive. So it was just such a wonderful opportunity to be a part of. And I always enjoy working with, Aboriginal people in Australia. Our First Nations people are wonderful. It's been one of the highlights of my career to spend time in these areas with them.
That's awesome, and especially to know all the different stories that are there that have to be told for people to understand, because what an incredible nature at work.
Well,
there.
it was funny because when I did the high country part, the mountain part, I had the horse people saying, they never go in the streams, they never go in anything, and they're not doing erosion or whatever. And I went, okay, cool. I'm open-minded. I'm not there to make the news. I'm there to document the news. So I jump in a helicopter and I'm in the air for probably 3.5 minutes. And the first stream I cross, there's half a dozen brumbies in the river muddying it up, and and all around the river's all this erosion. And wherever we landed, there's these massive cut throughs on these pristine alpine rivers and all this mud damage and everything. And I'm going, really? Really? So, but we gave as I said, we gave everyone a chance to have their say, and the story was well received.
That's awesome. All right, so let's talk about some of these adventures that you've had. What was something that was the most dangerous that you ever found yourself in?
Wow, that's a good question. You'd almost have to pick a country and a continent to narrow down the stupidity level, I think. I've been in trouble more time. I could do a whole book on just getting into trouble. But I mean, it's interesting because I will give you a couple of examples, but it's interesting for me because growing up as a child, my house was a halfway house for injured wildlife, almost like Gerald Durrell. There were snakes and frogs and dragons and tortoises and owls and kookaburras and everything. So I never knew a life raising kangaroos as a kid. I never knew a life where wildlife wasn't a part of me. And of course, as I said, then the zookeeping and my studies and everything. So when I have encounters with wildlife that go sideways, because it doesn't matter how much experience you have, it can go sideways. And I've been, hunted by hippo into reed beds on the Angolan border and things where I've had to sit there through the night, while they try and smash their way in a dugout canoe. And I've been chased by lions where I'm faster than I look over a short distance at least. And lots of snake bites. And I've had so much toxin in my body that my body now, if I get bitten by spiders, that my body now creates a calcium lump underneath the skin. That's this hard lump as a reaction to the venom. But it's interesting, Steve, because it's the little things that nail you. It's the lava behind eyeballs, and I had lava in my ear this year, and that was the fevers and everything. That was night terrors. That was terrible. And I came back from a South American shoot and wound up in an isolation ward, with 3 different viruses, and lost 12 months of my memory, 6 months before, 6 months after that actual shoot. And I've been a cesspool of disease for decades, and I've had MERS, which is 82% fatal, and swine and bird and bilharzia and malaria and brucellosis and all of these sorts of things and I've had arms reattached, fingers put back on, discs punched out of my neck, and I have this ability, touch wood, to heal quite well, actually. It freaks the surgeons out. But at the same point in time, there's been 10,000 other instances where I'll have encounters with wildlife that theoretically should go a different direction, and they don't, because this is other people saying this about me more than me myself, I guess, but I have a way with wildlife where I'm calm, it's calm, and so on and so forth. And it was funny because my wife and my son sometimes get to do Nat Geo shoots with me, and we're in a very remote island chain between New Zealand and Antarctica called the Subantarctics. and about 100 people a year get there. And so we're hiking on this island, and out across this button grass plain was a very rare albatross, just one sitting out on this windswept mountainside. So everyone keeps hiking, the team keeps hiking to see this particular bird rookery, and I just sat down, started taking some pictures, doing my thing, and over time, the albatross went, oh, hey, let's have a chat. So the albatross eventually comes up, sits right next to me. My lens wasn't wide enough to get this beautiful, enormous bird in. And of course, the team comes back, and, people are going, what is going on with this bird? And for Megan, my wife, she's seen it at time and time again, and she said, that's just what happens with Jace. It's like, he's not a threat, and often he's quite a curiosity for animals. And so people were sort of quite amazed. But for me, it was another day in the office in all the most positive ways. But as far as the danger factor goes, I mean, things go sideways with humans, can do that. So, I work in unstable areas, and sometimes the countries fold and rebellions erupt, or there's people shooting at me, or whatever the case might be. But I'm a humanist. I love your species. I've been a watcher of the human condition for decades. So I spent a lot of time alone where I just have to rely on just being part of the community. And if you're one of these people that likes taking pictures of people, don't let the camera be your greeting unless you're shooting documentary or reportage. Smile and wave, offer a hand. People are at their best when they think you're engaged with their community and who they are. If you want to get into a community or learn to shoot people, then be engaged. It's not all about you. It's actually all about them.
That's awesome. Incredible advice there too. That's and it's just wild that you've had all those experiences where that you've all the best to you to keep healing, I guess is my point. There we go.
Well, my wife did get pretty sick of me having to come back and do surgeries. And probably, a few years ago, she said, you've got to get better at this. I'm sick of being the nursemaid, because you get well and then you get on a plane again. So I don't think I've gotten any smarter. I'm a boy, so I don't think I've gotten any smarter. And the diseases definitely have not stopped. But I touch wood, I'm knocking on the table here. I am trying not to have as many surgeries as I've had in the past, that's for sure.
Well, good luck in that world. Stay away from those things. You got to talk a little bit about, you've mentioned some of this, but the most difficult part of storytelling with a photograph. I mean, as you're trying to tell a story and what you're seeing and stuff like this, what are you thinking about to make that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one of the things that people struggle to do the most with photography is storytell, I think, and we don't always get it right. I don't always get it right. But probably the baseline for me is that I think to myself, how do I translate this for someone who's not there? And that's something everyone can relate to. It doesn't matter whether it's Thanksgiving or it's a Christmas holiday or whatever it is. How do I share with someone, my skiing trip or something, they didn't feel the cold, or they didn't eat the food, or they didn't know the smells, or you go on a holiday to Thailand or something, and the wonderful lemongrass and coriander and all of these spices. So how do I show that in a photo for someone that's not there? That's always at the front of my mind. And actually in the back of the book, because I ran a scholarship for Geographic for 8 years, there's some, I think it's 10 points or something, but they're the guidelines that go through my brain when I'm actually thinking about storytelling. It's like, is this doing something different for photography? Am I engaging people? And so don't have anything too close to the edge of the frame, because that just leads people out of the story. It's fine to have a tight image, but if you're clipping something, if you're cropping it off at the edge and it shouldn't be, or it's too close to the top or the bottom or the left or the right, the human eye goes there. So sometimes if I've got frames that I'm not too sure which one in a sequence works, I'll put it up on the screen of my computer and I'll slide my desk chair back and I defocus my eyes. And then I'm looking, as I said earlier in the conversation, I'm looking for what doesn't belong. So if there's a reflection of a light off on a leaf in the background, or a shadow in the foreground, or I'm too tight to an edge or something, I know for a fact that if I've seen it with my eyes defocused, that's going to take the viewer away from the scene. So I'm always looking for that. And I don't shoot with the concept of removing anything from the pictures. I'm old school. So for those who know, I mean, in the book, there's no layers or dodging and burning or anything in any of the frames in the book. They're very minimal post-production. And so when you're telling stories, lead people in, look for lines that lead them in. Now, most people would know rule of thirds, which is tic-tac-toe, noughts and crosses. So you divide your frame into the noughts and crosses board, And if you put an element that's on one of the intersections or on one of the lines, it helps balance the picture. And it seems like a cliche, but this is due to our evolution. And there's been research done on this. We evolved as omnivores and predators because we're mammals and our eyes are in the front of our skulls. So it doesn't matter if you want to be a vegetarian or a vegan, but I've got to tell you, a couple of million years of evolution, your eyes are in the front of your skull and you're a mammal, you're a predator. And so power to you. I was vegetarian for 6.5 years. Then I lost everything, came home from an assignment and everything was gone and my vegetarian partner was gone. So I went back to eating meat, but that's a different story for another day. But use that tic-tac-toe. And also too, triangles are great. Draw an imaginary line from the one corner to the top of the page and then back to the other and then flip the page. Now, these triangles can come from the top to the bottom, bottom to the top in landscape and in portrait. And remember that picture, Liberty Leading the People, the famous French rebellion painting where Liberty's standing there holding the flag. That's a perfect example. It's these triangles, these golden means, we call them, that lead up. So, start looking for these triangles and these tic-tac-toes, but break the rules. Break the rules. You want to have a landscape. You want your horizon to be right near the bottom or right near the top or something. That's what I find the most fun about photography, breaking the rules.
That's awesome. I love it. All right, so you've done all this stuff. You've been all these different places. Is there a place where you had like the most bizarre or different transportation to get to where you were going that you didn't experience other places?
Wow. I mean, I don't think there's a form of transportation or almost not one that I haven't done, It's like, I'll get myself in and out and jump a border in any way I possibly can. One of the things is that, my legs have been pounded over the decades, that's for sure, having to hike so much of this. But, if there's a plane or a helicopter, I haven't done submarines, so if anyone's got a submarine, I'm keen to give it a try. But it's planes, trains, automobiles, sort of camels, horses, yaks, you name it, I've done it, and it's interesting because I was in Jordan shooting the famed Petra ruins. I've worked there a couple of times. And I'm up at this particular mountaintop and there'd been a sandstorm a couple of days before. And my friend there said, these Roman statues have just been uncovered by the sandstorm. We've got to get into that valley down there. And they haven't been seen in a couple of thousand years. And I went, right, great. Let's do it. And next thing you know, and this is, and I love the Middle East and I love it when people are speaking Arabic because they ask for a cup of coffee and it sounds like a declaration of war. It's all that guttural that Aussies can't speak. So we hear these calls coming up this desert gorge, one after the other. And then they get to, this Bedouin turns up to my friend who lives in this Bedouin community. And they have this exchange and then he says, the town has sent a message to say, do not forget that you are presenting to people in the VIPs in the town tonight. And now I'm a long way from the town in the desert. And I went, oh my God. So I never saw the Roman statues, but the point of that story in relation to what you asked me. So we start running down this mountainside. And as we're running with all the camera gear, my friend says, you do camel, don't you? You've always done camel. Yeah, I do camel. So they're hurling these calls down. So we get to the bottom of this desert gorge and there's a camel waiting for me, 2 camels waiting for us. So I've got the turban on, because they're so comfortable and they're so great in the heat. And everyone's gone. The sun's going down over the ruins. There's no tourists or anyone around, just the Bedouins and the stones flaming red. So I'm galloping, and this is where Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade was shot,
Right.
So, but I'm on the ancient Roman road, even which they didn't film in the thing. I'm galloping this camel with camels and the headbands, and all you can hear is these Bedouins either shock looks of disbelief that there's this white guy galloping through the ruins, or calling out, these lines. And I'm going, where's my film crew now? It's literally my Indiana Jones moment. And I've got Petra to myself, and I'm galloping a camel. And there's, and so as far as a travel story, when I think of all the things I've done, there's been boats up rivers or whatever. Some of the travel incredibly hard. But when I think of something that always makes me smile, it was that afternoon in Petra.
That's awesome. So, all right. So one of the things that as I'm listening to you, it seems like there's that maybe you have like a team with you. When you do shoots, are you by yourself or do you have a team with you? Or?
It just depends. Yeah, just depends. So especially building my career, I'd disappear for months on end and I'd be alone for months. And, about 3 weeks in, I start finding the jokes in my own head funny. So, maybe it's almost time to see someone. But it just depends on the shoot, Steve. So, of course, if I'm working with journalists, depending on, whether it's Nat Geo or someone else, sometimes a journalist, and often for me, at least in my experience, the journalists don't have as much time as I have because they work differently. Their experiences and everything like that don't necessarily mean that they need to sit there for 5 weeks or 10 weeks or something waiting to get that shot in order to be able to write the story. Not because it's more or less important, that's just not necessary sometimes. Sometimes it is. But so sometimes I'll be with a journalist, but then other times, depending on a lot of time alone in my career, but then also too, some of the things I do for Geographic these days where I'm bouncing into regions and maybe shooting World Heritage sites or something like that, we need that infrastructure to keep me moving. So there'll be myself and an archaeologist and maybe we've got someone who's doing the baggage and getting us to the next World Heritage site and doing the logistics and things like that. And that makes it so much easier. And then when we're on site, of course, we're working with local communities and sometimes Geographic has funded the research for decades. So the people we're working with, they're part of National Geographic. So you get that local input. But I'm pretty good at making contacts in places. I've done this a long time. I find a bar and start asking questions, and then you find someone's cousin's cousin, and they might know someone in a village somewhere that might be of interest, and then you start that process. You just start working it, but you don't always have the time that you want. People sometimes think I've got all the time in the world, and I most definitely don't. I mean, I was meant to have 36 hours in a sand dune field I'd always wanted to shoot in the Middle East. And I had the team, my local team change direction. And this guy comes out of the desert. A lot of camel stories, isn't there? That's funny. The guy comes out of the story on a camel, and it turns out the very next morning, starting at 5 a.m., is the biggest camel racing event in this part of the Middle East. And so I went, well, we've got to shoot that, so I'm the only white guy there and there's camels racing and I get all this access but of course that cut into the 36 hours in the sand.
Right.
But when I get there, there's a sandstorm coming and so the film crew started running the cameras and I had 17 minutes to shoot that sand dune field. And some of that work Nat Geo's used dozens and dozens of times, which is great. But that sandstorm hit me out on the dunes and did $6,500 damage to the cameras in my hand. But we got a couple of nice frames, but it wasn't 36 hours. It wasn't 36 days. It wasn't even 3 days. It was 17 minutes because we had the camera rolling for the video. So yeah.
Wow, that's cool. With all the stuff you experience, all the pictures and the writing and your thoughts that are shared in your book, is there something that is just so magical that you hope nothing ever takes that memory away from you? One of those experiences?
Very much so. And that's the thing. A lot of the images in the book are those last minute kind of frames that you never think is going to happen. But in the Serengeti story, there's a frame with a single giraffe and an ashen sky behind it. I don't know if you remember that frame. So that was my first trip to Africa. I'd been on the road three months or so. And that day, my friend, a New Zealand artist who was also a zookeeper, he was assisting me on that shoot. And we just watched this one wildebeest herd. We've been following wildebeest herds for days. And it decided to cross the Mara River. So they're crossing and they're so timid because there's lion everywhere and crocodile and thing. So I'm pushing the 4-wheel drive so that the engine's not on, Mark is steering it. And this lioness comes out of the bush next to me, literally next to me. So she's moving along with me. I could have literally put my hands on her shoulders.
Oh my gosh.
And she knows I'm there, of course, but she's using the 4-wheel drive as a shelter. And I said to Mark, hey, mate, there's a lion next to me. And he goes, yeah, you're so funny. We're being quiet. Okay. So when we finally stop the 4-wheel drive, she keeps walking and he goes, my God, there's a lion. I went, what did you think I was talking about? She grabbed 6 wildebeest in a frenzy and then kept letting them go before they were completely dead, and that's fractures the herd, and crocodiles were grabbing the wildebeest and everything. This is like, this is the start of my career, to have that opportunity again. But the reason I bring up that frame is because a single giraffe, knowing that there were lion around, moved into that wildebeest herd on the opposite side of the river to me. And in that frame, if you look at it again, you'll see the giraffe is enormous. It's a huge giraffe anyway, but it must have hit like a slight rise in the ground that even made it higher. Now, that shot has been used hundreds of times and many times by National Geographic. But the sky went ashen grey because it was the start of the short rains. The sun came out, and I only took 2 frames of that giraffe, one on the left and then the one that's in the book. And I sat there, and it was such a spiritual moment for me. Literally last day in the park on that shoot. It changed who I was as a person. It changed who I wanted to be. That whole assignment changed who I wanted to be as a person and as a photographer. And then to have it finish up like that, I've never lost the wonder of that moment and that memory for me, because it was even by my standards, and I'm very privileged to do what I do, but it was a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I've worked back in the Serengeti many, many times since then, and I love it, and it's always different. But that one moment was when I came back, I was not the same person that I was when I left.
That's amazing. The image, yes, very much so. I remember. I really am fascinated by giraffe, and so that's something else that I just I think they're an amazing creature.
Well, let me give you the crazy giraffe fact here.
Okay.
So giraffes' necks have the same number of vertebrae as a house mouse. Okay, but get this: this is wonders of evolution. So the proportion of a giraffe's neck to its body is exactly the same proportion as a mouse's tail to its body, as well as the vertebrae. They had a common ancestor back in the day, So these evolutionary adaptations that can see land mammals become whales and all of those sorts of things. It's amazing. But yeah, giraffes are incredible. But there you go, same number of vertebrae, and the math's the same on neck to body versus tail to body.
That's thank you for sharing that. That's pretty neat. Because it's just to know that you had that experience. And I have to say this first. I get this last comment about the giraffe leading up to this other part is that I've only experienced them in zoos and such, in a wild, where they have them in more of a more natural type habitat, and they're walking around, and you can come up to areas where they come up and you can feed them, and there's nothing more exciting than having the giraffe take interest in what you're holding out to it, and its long tongue comes out and nice slobber that left behind it.
Well, 18 inches of tongue, it's a fairly large tongue.
Yes, very much so. That lioness had to be something what an experience, man.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing with lion, I've had a lot of, because I've had the privilege of working with lion many times, but in the end, she finally grabbed a wildebeest, and the herd fractured and the crossing stopped. So she kept grabbing these wildebeest and letting them go, grabbing them, letting go. And the one she stayed on, which was, unfortunately photographic, it was down in the boulders, but we could see, we watched her, it wasn't a great shot, but she had 3 cubs who had been in hiding in the boulders by the water.
Wow.
And so she left that wildebeest alive so that the cubs could jump on it. They were large cubs to do the kill. So she was teaching the cubs to kill. So we didn't even know they were there. So just the way the riverbank curved, so she was in the bushes above the cubs who were in the boulders. I pushed the 4-wheel drive past. She comes out and uses me as shelter. And then we go a little bit around the riverbank so she can get a better run at the wildebeest as they come up the bank. But then the one that she ended up grabbing, she grabbed down by the water's edge, and that was when the cubs came out from hiding. So it was this whole surreal, watching life unfold and life and death and teaching and all of that kind of stuff all in one afternoon. And I remember looking at my mate and saying, wow, that was something. And we were always in trouble with our permits, and then the lights sort of folded, and then we said, we've got to go, man, we've got to get out of this gate, they'll fine us, So that was the end of the shoot. Literally, we left the national park and drove our way back across the country to go to another shoot.
That's awesome. All right, I got to ask this question. So, do you ever go on vacation? If so, where do you go? Who's been to all these wild places?
Well, look, it's interesting for me. So, as you're gathering, sometimes I step this back. So, when my son Will was born, my boss at Nat Geo said, "This is a job that can really impact families and relationships. I don't want you to have that because I've been here a long time." And so she kept me. She said, "I want you to spend as much time as you want to going back through the archives. What have we missed? Things like that. This was so early in my Nat Geo career." But find us content that we'd like. So my wife took 20 months off. I took 20 months off, and the three of us I just went back through the archives. So for that first couple of years, I didn't travel. When Will started at kindergarten and elementary school, which was around the corner from my house, I befriended all the teachers and would go for a beer with them on Friday afternoon at the pub. So I could be at the school every day because I was working on US time. So I could work at night. So right through through Will's, that's my son's name, Will's elementary school, I only built the shoots up slowly, but Megan and Will were always able to come with me, to segue back to your point, so not always, but from 6 months of age onwards, Megs and Will traveled with me on Nat Geo shoots. And what that led, fast forward that through high school and everything, and is that when they're on holiday, I'm working because it's my work that actually funds them to Antarctica or New Guinea or Africa or all these places they've had the opportunity to go. So I don't take time off in that traditional sense, but having my family there is wonderful. However, I was very fortunate to be able to structure my travel so that when Will was always on school holidays, I'd take that time off and, we go surfing and things like that. So it's not as if I've never had time off. It's just different than what people understand. Here's a freaky math for you, that in July this year, which is our winter, the three of us, we were diving in New Guinea, in West Papua in April for the autumn, for the fall school holidays. And I had a shoot there, so they came. And so we took off to do a bit of surfing in Hawaii in July. That was the first trip, Steve, in my entire professional career where I've gone international and didn't shoot. Not because Hawaii is not beautiful. There's plenty of things to shoot in Hawaii. But I actually took a couple of weeks off. I took a camera, never pulled it out. I pulled it out one day and didn't shoot anything. But, for me, staying close to home, I love to read. I love to surf. I, swim in the local pool, things like that. That July holiday this year was a bit of an eye-opener for me, going, wow, this is why humans take holidays. It's like, because I don't tire, maybe that's evident from our interview, but, I enjoy what I do, and I do get monumentally tired, but it's a long-winded explanation to say maybe moving forward, I'll do more of the traditional sort of holiday thing that you would understand or your listeners would understand. But for me, what I do has been an opportunity for my family to see the world and for me to have them in the field. And then the time that I take where it's time off to have holidays with, it's normally not too far from home. I do a lot of miles. Up until this July, I've never really had a desire to get on a plane and just go and sit on a beach somewhere, because I take the camera gear anyway and find something to shoot. But
it's funny.
Hey, we all evolve, Steve. We all evolve, and
Yes.
I've had my first international non-shooting holiday in my entire life. And I'm sure it'll open the door for other opportunities.
That's awesome. Almost finished, and one of the things I got to ask you, Jason, is can you share with everybody where they might reach out to you, connect with you, find your book? I mean, leave them with that information.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, the one thing I'd say is I'm a bit useless on keeping up with all of my social and things like that, because I move often. I've been in and out of a couple of dozen countries this year. So, if you catch me on the usual Instagram and Facebook side of things, it's Jason Edwards NG for National Geographic. So Jason Edwards NG. And you'll see that I sometimes manage to do the things, social while I'm in the field. And other times I just come back, just bear with me. I'll always share something that I've done. If you ever want to reach out, you can do it through the website, which is jasonedwards.co. Please, I have a lot of frames that people want for fine art or whatever. Again, I don't even post them. If there's something you'd like or something you see on social, just send me a message through the website and we can talk about fine art prints. Don't expect that I'm going to get around to putting it on the website, because if I've got a choice of getting on a plane and looking at a giraffe or a penguin or something, I'm going to do that rather than do social. But also too, the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and good bookstores around the country. One of the things that I have noticed on that whole thing is that maybe just because it's Christmas time, especially on Amazon, just have a look and make sure that you pick a delivery option that's pretty quick. Everyone was on Prime up until Thanksgiving, and then it seems like the whole book industry has gone to slower deliveries post Prime. So I do apologize, but you can get it quickly, but you might have to pay a couple of bucks for delivery. So go to Amazon and things like that and grab a copy.
Very cool. And I'll put that information in the show notes so they can connect with you and then go grab a copy, which is cool. I got one last question for you that I got to ask, and it goes like this. Do you have a teacher or instructor or someone who made a difference in your life that if given a chance to say thank you, you would do that? And who would this person be, and what would you say?
Yeah, that's a question I've never been asked, but the answer is most definitely yes. And I have been extremely, extremely humbly fortunate to have had several people like that in my life. And the first person was Henry Lawson, who was my grade 5 teacher. Now, my mum was pretty engaged in the school and things like that, but Mr. Lawson was, he realized that I was not playing on the same field as everyone else. I love school. I was fortunate. I had a gifted childhood. I went to the most academic selective school in all of Asia. I was smarter younger, but, now whine. What are you going to do? You lose your intelligence. But, it's Mr. Lawson plucked me from the pack and gave me opportunities to excel and for my brain to explore. And so when I did my first children's education book, I dedicated that to him because that was life-changing for me, because I realized that there was opportunities that I could have if people believed in me, if people outside of your immediate family believed in me. So Mr. Lawson changed that, and then different people came into my life, sometimes much older friends who might have been, 85 or something like that. And they were so interested in what I was doing. And I was so fascinated in their life experience that we fed off each other. When my oldest friend, Ken, passed away, he went and lived on a Greek island at 70 and learned ancient Latin while he herded goats, because he just had an interest in doing that. I was devastated at that loss but simultaneously, he lived such an incredible life, So my English teacher in year 12, my final year of high school, just kept pushing and pushing and pushing, because I love to write. But, when you're in school, you have to write to an exam model or something, And so, I had all of those. But that's so much of that is, I guess, literature. And I did write the book. But it was fascinating for me that one of the German curators called me in at the zoo one day, and he said, "I want to talk to you about your photography." And I said, okay. And I thought as a young buck, I was just going to get in trouble yet again, because I was a young guy with money and going out often, always turning up to work a little bit late. And he said, and he was an award-winning photographer in Germany before he came to Australia. And he said, "You do things with a camera that I can't do. But you need to change the way you're thinking. You need to see the world consciously in 2x3, because that's the relationship of 35 millimeter, 36 by 24 millimeters. So it's 2x3. He said, "You're doing it now unconsciously, but I want you to see the dotted lines in portrait, orientation, landscape. It will take you at least 6 months, but 9 months. You need to, open," and this is a 2-hour conversation, I'm paraphrasing. And I must have had that look on my face of an 18 or 19-year-old or something that's going, yeah. I wasn't. I liked this guy a lot. But he said, if you go shopping, see the 2x3. If you go riding your bike, 2x3. You're fighting with your partner, 2x3. You're having, every scenario, listed about 20 scenarios. And Steve, I took that advice. And for the next 6 to 9 months, I physically tried to see the dotted lines. Now, that wasn't too difficult for me. I painted and I drew, and I was doing it already unconsciously. But after 6 to 9 months, I couldn't turn it off. So now I am always on the clock. I get off a plane on a shoot, I am shooting straight off the bat. I don't have to fire it up. I can't turn it off. I go to sleep with the 2x3 behind my eyeballs. While you and I have been talking, I could have shot 100 frames of you, but it helps with the composition. So that mentor, and Ernst, his name was, Ernst was a great mentor in that space, because, I could have easily have just fell back on my young person ego going, I can get some good shots and people are publishing my pictures. But no, someone stepped up and they said, okay, you're at a precipice here in your creativity. Let me give you a piece of advice that you can either adopt or not, but it may put you on a different path. And apart from marrying my wife, which is the smartest thing I ever did, that was the smartest career piece of advice I ever took, was to see the world that way and have it turned on 24/7.
That's so cool. I appreciate you sharing that. And it's knowing about the different people who've made some impact on your world and such like this over the years.
And it's interesting, Steve. I've always tried to give back. Because I realized even as such a young person how important it is. So sometimes people. I'll mentor people. You can find out that through the website, or if I find people, I stop in the street sometimes. I'm pretty gregarious. I'm an Aussie, but I'm gregarious even by Aussie standards. I'll see people struggling with their cameras. Oh, can I help you? People go, who the hell are you? Oh, have you ever taken any pictures? Oh, I've taken a couple, and I do that for Geographic. I help people, learn those sorts of things. But also part of my role with Geographic is to break down barriers, to help people see the differences between faiths and cultures and environmental issues and things like that, either verbally in presentations or, because I'm engaged to speak, corporately and things. But I know that for any age, whether I'm mentoring up, down, sideways, it doesn't matter. Having someone in your corner can really change someone's life. And so I do it. And so much so, I'm building a place down on the coast in Victoria. We had years of battling with council, and we'll break ground in 2025. And I'm moving my office down there, and it's growing in scale so they can have people in my own home and help them see, with mental health, help them see the world a bit differently, do some storytelling, drink some wine, eat some cheese. But it's so important to me giving back that I'll end up opening my home to people to try and do that even a bit more.
I love it. Oh my gosh. That's incredible. And by the way, I have to say, it's just funny because I'm pretty sure I'm guilty of making those, when you're referencing being like a 19-year-old, those looks that you give when someone gives you advice or something like this. I love that. I didn't know exactly what you're talking about. And Jason, thank you so much for talking with us about your book, Icebergs to Iguanas, Photographic Journeys Around the World. Fantastic. Incredible photographs. Makes the reader feel like you're there. Your stories are just incredible. What an amazing world you've shared with us. And I'm wishing you the best in all you do.
Thanks, mate. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast chatting with you.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.